Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so yesterday, we had seen Rav Moshe give a tshuva about the administration of the yeshiva misrepresenting the number of students so that they could get more funding from the government. And Rav Moshe had said that that categorically is usher. I wanted to share with you the very next tshuva that appears in Igros Moshe. I'm not sure when that previous tshuva had appeared, but this tshuva was written in 1980. And it regards a similar issue, but here it's more of a Geneva Stas issue, of deceiving, but also on an institutional level being deceptive. And it has to do with the school here as well. And the shaila is be'isser genevas tshuvas l'she'elos mivchanei hasiyum she'osa hamedina, stealing the answers on a test that is administered by the state to determine proficiency. And this is, of course, in the state of New York. Rav Moshe writes as follows: Hinei bidvar she'elato al ma sheshama shebiyeshivos matirin lahatalmidim lignov et hatshuvot lahashe'elot b'mivchanei hasiyum she'osa hamedina. Regents, he says, Rav Moshe says, what you, the writer, has asked me is about what you've heard, that in some yeshivas they permit the students to steal the answers on the standardized tests that are given by the state, which are called the Regents exam in the state of New York. And apparently this person who was asking the question, of a particular distinguished individual, had read in the newspaper that this had been going on, that a reporter had uncovered a scandal that in certain yeshivas the students were gaining access to the answers on the Regents exam, and that's how the students were doing so well. Okay, so this is, by the way, it's the very next tshuva from the one that we learned yesterday. It's in Choshen Mishpat Chelek Beis Siman Lamed. So it's Kedei Lahonos Ulakabel Esatu Udot Shegamru B'Tov. And so they're doing this in order that they can get a higher score, get a great certification, and this will help them get good jobs, right? Hinei davar zeh aser lo rak midina de malchusa ela midina haTorah. He says, so such a behavior is prohibited not only because it violates the laws of the land, but it's also a biblical prohibition. And what it is that you're stealing people's knowledge. In other words, you're being deceptive, which is also a Torah prohibition. It's a form of Geneva, like we've learned before. Kida Amar Shmuel B'chulin Daf Tzadi Daled Amid Aleph Sha'asr Lignov Das Habrios Vafilu Daito Shal Ako. That Shmuel in the Gemara says that you're not allowed to deceive people with misrepresentation, and that's true regardless of whether it's a Jew or a non-Jew. Now consider, says Rav Moshe, that this prohibition is only compounded here because it doesn't involve just deceiving the government and the people who administered the exam, but it also deceives everyone potentially in the world, including Jews. He says, because think forward. In other words, this person who's going to steal the answers to the Regents exam is then going to want to use that high score to put on his resume, and he's going to try to get a job using that high score. So many times a reputable firm will want to hire someone who has a high Regent score. And he'll then be able to show, look at my high regent's score. And based on that, and based on that, they'll hire him. So that's additional deception. Not only are you stealing the answers from the government, not only are you deceiving the government by scoring high on the regent's exam, but you're deceiving a future employer as well, who's going to look at your score and think that you're someone that you're not. Ve'ein lo litos velomar, or liton velomar, sha'afim kibluhu la'avod etzlo adaita da'achi, hu kimakbet al davar she'eno tzorach sherashai l'shaker. So Rav Moshe says, well, maybe you'll make the argument that who really cares about a regent's exam? A regent's exam is only an indicator of my IQ, but it doesn't indicate how hard I'm going to work and how industrious I'll be. And so what difference does it make? In other words, does it, yes, it's true, it'll get my foot in the door, but I'm going to have to prove myself at work every single day. So what difference is it going to make to my employer? So maybe I would be permitted to misrepresent my knowledge on my resume because at least it'll get me the job, and then I'll prove myself that I'm a worthy employee. So he says, "Chada da'afim hu emes she'ein lahakbid hu vaday kpeda ubatla kabalasa." So first of all, he says that's your attitude, but that's not the employer's attitude. The employer really will not entertain a person for an interview who doesn't get a certain score. So by even the act of getting your foot in the door is based on deception, and that's not acceptable. And the employer himself says that I'm only interested in people who get a certain score on the standardized exam, and so you've deceived him. And for him it does make a difference, because he wants to make sure that his employees are high scorers. And furthermore, says Rav Moshe, even if your argument were true, that how much you score on a standardized exam is not going to affect your performance at a particular job, you're still not allowed to lie, even if it doesn't have any ramifications. The only time that you're allowed to lie is in order to make shalom, is in order to avoid conflict, right? Like the Gemara says, you're allowed to be mishana mipnei hashalom. You're allowed to change the truth or actually lie for the sake of peace. So, for example, if someone asks you, do you know a certain piece of Torah knowledge, you're allowed to say, I don't know it, even if you do know it, because out of modesty, you're allowed to demur. If someone asks you, did you sleep here? And it may compromise a certain act of propriety because there may be a stain on the bed or something, you're allowed to deny it. If someone asks you, where did you lodge when you went to that town, you're allowed to lie and make up a story if you feel that you're protecting your host from not having to host other people. Those are three examples that are given by the Gemara that you're allowed to lie in order either to protect your own modesty or, because you're in a pickle. That's when you're allowed to lie. But to proactively lie so that you can gain something that will benefit you, even if there's no harm caused by the lie, that's still not permitted. V'gam im yada shehu mishaker lo hayasomech alav bichlum v'yigrom shiach v'gam im yada shehu mishaker lo hayasomech alav bichlum. And furthermore, let's say the employer discovers that you lied. The employer would not want you to be a member of his staff, because then not only do you not have the qualifications that he needed, but he also wouldn't be able to trust you. And furthermore, v'yigrom shiachshod la'acher kishiachsar eze davar da'oso lo yachshod machmas shalomad b'yeshiva. He says, furthermore, it's going to cause that the employer, when he sees that a guy with a yarmulke lied about his regent score, he's going to suspect other people who learned in yeshiva and are from people umachzik letalmidei chachamim v'ish neman v'yasalek leha'acher mimishor so af shehemes sha'acher lo lokach, and it's going to cause him to suspect all people who are from the yeshiva community, and it's going to cause him to not want to hire Jews. Oh, I'm sorry. He says that you're lying, if the employer were to find out, is going to cause him to suspect other people in general. And it's going to actually cause real damage, even if the other person did not lie on his regent's exam. Right? Va'od dekan shemakpidin inshi vaday shayach lahakpid diyesh vaday dvarim demishu hu baki belimudei chol hu yoser yodea binyani iskei parnasim imasum mimatan. And furthermore, there is a reason for the employer to expect the person to do well on his regent's exam. He says, because Rav Moshe says there is a direct correlation between people who score high on scholastic exams and people who do well in the area, in the business world. So you may think that, I'm a bad test taker, but I'm really good and I'm really industrious and I'm really a hard worker, yada, yada, yada. And that all may be true. But the employer's attitude is, no, I want to hire people where there's a direct correlation between how well they do on tests. And I want those kind of people to work for me because I feel that they will perform better. Umemela, so for all of those reasons, Vadai Asur, Af L'machashavto Sheyarviach Al Yedei Zeh B'limud HaTorah. And even if the justification for giving the answers away to the students is that you'll give them more time to study Torah, that's not a justification. Shegam b'shvil limud haTorah asur lignav, like we learned before in the previous tshuva, where Rav Moshe talked about lying to the government so that you can get more funding, just because you can justify it because it's for a yeshiva. Just because a yeshiva teaches Torah does not permit them to steal. The imchashka nafsho b'Torah ein lo lidog shema lo yeda kol kach v'lo yilo simin tov alayhu. He says, and the fact of the matter is that if you are committed to a life of Torah, you shouldn't have these worries that maybe you won't do so well and you're not going to know enough. Avol ha'emes she'ein bazeh inyan bittul Torah, deme'acher shaholech lilmod limudei chol hu rak atzlus ba'alma. He says, and the reality is that argument isn't even valid. The fact is, the school sets a time aside in its day to teach secular studies. And the fact that the student feels that he still needs the answers to the regent's exam is a sign that he's just being lazy and doesn't want to apply himself to the time that's allotted for the secular studies. Because after all, the time has already been allotted in the school day for secular studies, which should be sufficient to give him the proper grounding that he needs to do well on the exam. And finally, it has a corruptive effect, providing the answers, because it'll cause this person to become lazy. It'll cause this person to cut corners in general in life. And if anything, it'll be a disincentive for him to work hard in his studies. And so for all of those reasons, Rav Moshe says in the concluding paragraph, Aval barur she'etzem hadavar sheshama malas kavodo hu sheker misonei hayeshivas. Rav Moshe concludes by saying that I can't even believe that this report is even true. I can't believe that what you've heard, that a yeshiva or yeshivot are providing the answers to their students for the exams of the regents, is even true. I just can't believe it, says Rav Moshe. He says this report must be coming from people who hate yeshiva schools. It must be coming from people who are trying to libel yeshivot because they have something against Orthodox Jews. Ki adarabba, because if anything, it is well known, Yadua shebnei hayeshiva hime elu shaf bilimudei chol adifi mitalmidim shalomdim bebate sefer shalahem. It is well known that students who come out of yeshiva actually do better scholastically than people who just go to public school, because their minds are sharpened and they're instigated to work harder because of a dual curriculum. So Rav Moshe, if anything, I can't even believe it's true that anyone studying in yeshiva would even need the answers to the regents. Va'al yachush lahashmuah shel sheker. And Rav Moshe says, if I were you, I would not even worry about these false reports. He says, even if it's printed in a well-known newspaper, this article that accuses the yeshivas of stealing the answers, he says, because it was probably written by an anti-religious reporter. V'yirei Hashem, v'yachol malas kvodo lomer b'peh malei shuhu sheker v'chazav misonei Torah v'das Yisrael. And Rav Moshe says, I give you permission to say fully to anyone who makes the accusation that this is just an outright lie. I just can't believe it. V'hineni yedido mevarcho sheyiskadlu banov l'Torah liyirah shamayim. I therefore give you a bracha that you should raise your children with a love of Torah and a fear of heaven. Signed, Rav Moshe Feinstein. So this is apparently written by a parent in a school where the accusation was made that the children were being provided the answers on the exam by either one of the teachers or one of the administrators. And so Rav Moshe basically said, number one, it's absolutely usser. This causes real deception and geneva. And two, I can't believe it's true. Now, something in my memory tells me that many years ago I had heard about this, that certain yeshivas were giving the students the answers to the regents exam. Does anyone ever remember hearing about this?
No.
I'm just looking at, okay, June 19th, 1974 in the New York Times. 2 outstanding scholars expelled for stealing regents' tests answers. See the article in its original context. Okay, 2 18-year-old students, both described as outstanding scholars, who had frequently spoken out against immorality in society, were expelled yesterday from the Solomon Schechter High School of Brooklyn a few days before their scheduled graduation for having recently stolen answer sheets to the statewide regents' examinations. Meanwhile, throughout the state, thousands of high school students took other regents' exams that were given as education authorities in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office continued to look into the circumstances surrounding the theft of test materials from the Jewish Day School and possibly 2 other Brooklyn schools. The breach in security, the first of such magnitude in the 96-year history of the high school testing program, forced the cancellation of 9 of the 21 regents' examinations scheduled to be given this week. It also spread confusion and concern among students and parents, despite statements from state education officials that no youngster would be denied a diploma or affected in any way by the cancellation of the tests. Let's see. Just looking at the article. So these boys were expelled. He said they had been accepted by very good colleges. Now he added the school will write to these colleges withdrawing our earlier recommendations. The 2 students and 2 college students who have also admitted taking part in the same theft have not been identified. Okay, that's the gist of the article. It's from June 19th, 1974. So certainly fits the timeline of what we're talking about. It was a Solomon Schechter school, which was a conservative school, a conservative Judaism school. Let's see. All right. Anyway. Okay. Just thought that might be of interest to you. Okay. Let us go on. Another issue that's taken up in the Likutim, which is where we're up to over here. Laso sukkah b'reshus harabim, bi'ir shel nachrim. Can I build a sukkah on public property? Is that theft or not? So he says, Ayin Magin Avram da Aser. The Magin Avram says that this is Aser. Va'af sheb'di'evet keshera, even though b'di'evet it's kosher. In other words, mikol makom lo yivarech aleha dahavi bracha levatala.
Excuse me, Rabbi, could you change the screen?
Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. I will change the screen. There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Ron. Okay, so the Magen Avram says that you're not allowed to build a sukkah on public property without permission because that's considered to be an act of theft. Now, b'di'evid, the sukkah is still kosher, but you're not supposed to make a bracha on it. Ulam b'mishnah berurah sham sifkat and yod hevi cholkim al ze ayin sham. But there is a debate about this in the Mishnah Berurah. Now, and finally, he writes, Hamar ela chavero lignov, o sholcho lignov. If I demonstrate to my friend how to steal, like I show him how to pick a lock, or I ask him to steal for me, ein hamishaleach chayav. In this case, the dispatcher, the person who taught his student how to steal, is not in any way liable halachically. De ein shliach lidvar aveira. Because we have a general principle of ein shliach lidvar avera, which means that there's no such thing as a dispatcher for to do a sin to be held liable. And the basis of this idea is divrei harav, divrei hatalmud, divrei misham. And this is a famous phrase that appears in many places in the Gemara and in the Poskim. It's basically, if I tell you to go and commit an act of theft and you steal based on my request, I can't be held liable because I could always say to you, Hashem told you not to steal and I told you to steal. Why would you listen to me over God? So divrei harav, divrei hatalmud, if the master tells you one thing and the student tells you another thing, don't you listen to the master, right? Of course you would listen to the master. The fact that you chose to steal just because I told you to cannot be pinned on me because God had also told you not to steal. So the fact that you stole really was your decision. It wasn't my decision. It was your decision. And therefore it cannot be, I cannot be incriminated because of that. Now that's, by the way, that's contrary to secular law. Because in secular law, if I hire a hitman, or if I hire someone to commit a crime, then I can be incriminated for that. But that's one of the differences between Jewish law and secular law. Mihu im hashaliach eno bar chiyuva yesh omrim de hamashaleach chayav. However, the exception to this rule in halacha is what if I tell a child to steal? So according to many opinions, then the dispatcher is chayav. He's going to be liable because the child does not have enough discretion to know that he's not supposed to listen to the adult and should rather listen to God. And the Shach disagrees, and he says that the dispatcher will always be exempt, will always be off the hook. But we're not going to go into that right now. But okay. All right. So what we had seen is we're still just systematically going through the Imrei Yaakov and the Likutim. And the Imrei Yaakov, the Rav Shulchan Aruch had said that you're not allowed to steal from any person male, female, Jew, non-Jew, minor, or adult. In other words, adult or minor. And on this idea of stealing from a child, ben katan, umayri bekatan shiyorash me'aviv osochar pe'ulasa, or oschar pe'ulasa, that we're talking about a child who was given money either through an inheritance or through compensation for work, oshenasnu lo matana, or that he was given a gift. The das acheres makna also, because when an adult gives a child money, the child becomes the legal owner of that asset. But as we had established in the previous chapter, if a child finds something, right, and I steal it from that child, I have not committed a biblical act of geneva, but it still is rabbinically prohibited because of darchei shalom, because of preserving the peace. So hopefully you remember that from the last chapter. That wasn't that long ago. Okay. All right. Any questions or comments at this point? The Likutim says that if a child is the thief, the katan sheganav im hakerin kayam machzirin leba'olim. If the principal, the item that he stole, is still intact, you return that to the owner. V'im eno be'en pater af la'achar sheyagdil. And if the principal is no longer intact, the child is pater, because the child is not held responsible for his behavior. And that's true even after he gets older and becomes of age. He is not obligated to make restitution. But some say that that's only when the child lost the object and never benefited from it. But there are people who believe that if the child benefited from the stolen item, then when he gets older, he is obligated to make restitution. And in all instances, the poskim say that if he wishes to fulfill his heavenly obligation, like a child stole candy, right? Stole candy from the rabbi's stash of candy that he gives out. Child realizes that what he did was wrong, but he was a kid. So he looks back 10 years later and wants to know, do I have an obligation to make restitution? So the answer may be, maybe yes, maybe no. Certainly the rabbi, if he is moichel on the candy, that's certainly sufficient. But if a person wishes to fulfill his heavenly obligation because he feels bad about it, he really should give a donation to the shul to compensate the shul for all the candy he stole. It's happened many times that kids have come in after services are over and have just filled their pockets with candy. So tell those kids, you want to do the right thing, make restitution, make a donation to the shul. Okay, we'll hold it here for today. We'll continue Mirz Hashem tomorrow. Have